Good morning, everyone. Today is March 10th, 2026, and you are here for our 2026 legislative priorities wrap up for the short session here in Oregon. My name is Alice Morrison. I'm the co-executive director of Friends of Family Farmers, and I am the lead of our policy program. So I've been representing our 1,600 farmer members at the legislature and in these conversations um, throughout this short session. So, our short session, we're going to start with a calendar check just about what is going on now and what's going to be happening in the next couple months. Then we'll talk about priority bills and budget reduction packages and the anti-hunger package that we endorsed, and then next steps. So, on March 6th, Friday of last week, the sine die. That was the end of the session. That's when everything ended. All of the things were passed. Everything is done. So, the governor now has 30 days to sign or not sign or veto all of the bills that are coming out of the legislature. So, here in Oregon, you have three options as a governor. You can sign the bill, which, you know, obviously makes it law. But then if you don't sign the bill, then 30 days after you don't sign the bill, it just becomes the law. So we don't have what's called a pocket veto here in Oregon. Some states do. Some states have a pocket veto, meaning if the governor does not sign the bill, then it cannot become law. But here in Oregon, if the governor does not sign the bill, it still becomes law. It just takes longer. The last option is for the governor to veto a bill. That would mean that she says, no, can't become law. Theoretically, it could return to the legislature in a special session that could be called. And if they were to get a two-thirds majority of um, all representatives and senators to vote for that, they could overturn the governor's veto. That's not very common, but yeah, so that's kind of the governor timeline now that the session is over. And then I also wanted to make a note about when bills take effect. So, if the bill has something called an emergency clause, it means the bill can take effect either immediately, 30 days, or 90 days after passage. That's specified in the bill. It's usually like the last section of the bill. If you're on OLIS, the Legislative Information System, and you're looking at the text of a bill, it should say somewhere in there, this bill takes effect upon passage, or this bill takes effect with 30 days after passage. But if there's no emergency clause in there, usually bills take effect January 1st of the following year. So when we talk about one of our priority bills that we were opposed to, it is going to be on that timeline. So it won't take effect until January 1st of 2027. So just so everyone knows that, like, we're not jumping into immediate changes here. It still takes time for this all to take effect and for the changes to come to bear. Okay, so we're going to cover some of the priorities that we were following in this legislative session. We had two land use priority bills that we were following, and then uh, the majority of the other things that we were following and covering were budget requests. So we'll cover that in the next section. Excuse me. So we are going to first talk about HB 4153, the Farm Stores and Stands bill. So this bill is the current iteration of a very long conversation. So just want to provide some context that, like, we have known that our folks, our constituents, our farmers and ranchers around the state have wanted changes and modernizations to the farm stand code for years. We've been hearing about this in our legislative, our policy setting focus groups and their survey for years. We've been doing these for almost 2 decades, and this comes up continuously that folks want clarity on the farm stand issue. And then there was a bill brought forward by the Oregon Property Owners Association in 2025, HB 3133. There was a legislative working group called by the House Ag Committee co-chairs. I was a member of that working group. I was appointed to it. And then that working group decided that we didn't need statutory change, we needed rulemaking. So then the Department of Land Conservation and Development started a rulemaking process to amend the way that the current law is implemented in the summer of 2025. That rulemaking process blew up in a social media campaign, some of which was warranted, some of which was a little beside the point. There's a long explanation of that on our website if anyone is curious to know line by line what was going on there. And that rulemaking effort was halted by the governor. The governor received a lot of public pressure to take action on this issue. And she decided that she was going to take it out of DLCD's hands. So that led to what I would describe as a process breakdown, because that's where FoFF's policy creation involvement ended until the beginning of the session. Although we were involved in the rest of the process, we had a seat at the table. We have always come to every table we've been invited to. We've continuously reached out to the governor to talk about the nuances of this issue. There was a closed door process between the governor's office, DLCD, ODA, and the Oregon Property Owners Association, and a small advisory group of farmers whom essentially drafted the proposal that was brought to the legislature. We saw the proposal for the first time a few days before the session started when it was a legislative concept. We delivered several different red lines, and our edits were not meaningfully incorporated. And especially when we talked about the sweeping changes that this makes to the primary commercial use of farm stands, we did not feel like our voices were heard at all, and our issues with this proposal were not addressed. So there are some larger implications in the farm stand question than just diversified farm income. Our farmers want to diversify their income. They want to welcome people to the farm. They want to have educational experiences on the farm that they can charge a small entry fee for. They want to have farm to table dinners. They want clarity on which value added products are farm products versus incidental products. There are lots and lots of ways. They even want higher revenue percentages for these fee-based activities and incidental sales. We understand and accept that and are in favor of those things. What we are not in favor of is taking the entire agritourism statute, which is currently a sub 2 use of EFU zone land, and putting it into the farm stand statute, which is a sub 1 use of EFU zone land. So what do those two, the sub 1 and sub 2, mean? When we say sub 1 and sub 2, we're talking about the subsections of the Oregon's ORS, the Oregon Regulatory Statute, that governs the uses of exclusive farm use zone land. So exclusive farm use zone land is our prime farmland. I know that there is a lot of marginal farmland that's also zoned EFU, but that zoning indicates that this land is primarily for agricultural production. And that comes with some tax benefits. Essentially, your EFU zone land has a tax deferral on it, and regardless of what was said during legislative votes this year, it is incredibly easy to maintain that tax deferral status without having to prove much or any commercial production on your land, because when you're zoned EFU, your production has no acreage limits for the tax deferral and has no revenue requirements. If you want the tax deferral and you're not zoned EFU, if you want the farm tax deferral, you do have to prove income on that land if you're not zoned EFU. But when you are zoned EFU, and we're only talking about EFU and farm forest zone land when we're talking about this bill. If you have a farm stand on rural residential or impacted forest or another or F2 or another zoning, this law actually doesn't apply to you. This is only for EFU and farm forest zone land. But when we're talking about the uses of that EFU zone land that is for agriculture and has a tax deferral based on its use for agriculture, we've got kind of two buckets. The first bucket is the subsection 1 bucket. And the subsection 1 is uses that are in concert with farm use that are allowed in every county in Oregon. And the counties cannot tell you that you are not allowed to do this thing. They can only condition your permit to make sure that you're not posing, for example, a sanitation threat or something like that. So that means that they cannot say no to these permits in the sub one. They can only condition them. Sub two uses of EFUs on land are another list of activities and operations that you can have on EFUs on land, but counties can choose whether or not to limit those activities. So essentially, they can say no to a permit in sub two. Agritourism permits, as they currently stand in law, are sub two uses. That is why some counties allow agritourism and some counties have opted not to allow certain agritourism activities, or they don't have to allow as many agritourism activities. And that is something that folks can take up with their county commission and make the case that, hey, this is appropriate in our area, or this is not appropriate in our area. And if you would like to have FoFF support in a county commission, campaign to help you do that, we would love to help you do that. I think that the most important thing is that sub two uses are also subject to the impacts on neighboring farms, or quote, the good neighbor test. Whether or not your operation, your events, your festivals, your what have you, your event rentals, especially. So like agritourism, I know we talk about weddings all the time. Right now, wedding rentals, that's an agritourism permit that people are getting. So you can do that right now if your county allows agritourism. You just have to apply for the permit to do so. I understand that those permits are burdensome. They are complicated in some counties, and I support a streamlining of that process so everyone understands where you are and are not allowed to do certain activities. But the fact of the matter is those sub two uses are not inherently farm uses and need to be subject to neighboring farm good neighbor tests to make sure you're not impacting the people around you. And they also are not, you're not able to get permits to do permanent structural changes to your farm based on those sub two uses most of the time. There are ways around that. There are a lot of different ways to permit things on farms, but sub one uses are considered universal. So essentially what's happening in this bill, all of that long explanation to say, is that we're taking agritourism activities and putting them from sub two to sub one in the farm store permit. That means you're circumventing county control, you're circumventing that good neighbors test, and you're now giving people the ability to build permanent structures in 4153 as amended and passed up to 10,000 square feet for public use for fee-based events, of which there is no limit. And we know there's also been debate about whether or not these new uses will impact farm values. And I'm talking property values, like how much it costs to buy a farm. And although there is conversation about whether just adding a particular use influences the market enough to make it more expensive, there are two things that I would invite everyone to consider on this question. If you build a 10,000 square foot building that is up to code to have the public in it for events, that is going to increase your property value by a couple $100,000, I'm willing to bet. That is a large investment. And also, when we talk about FSA loans, which is the most common way, well, maybe not most common way, but it is a way that farmers have traditionally purchased farmland, because farming is an inherently risky business. You are working with natural forces. You are subject to climate change and extreme weather and all kinds of things that are outside of your control, pests and disease and plant biology ad nauseum. So there are a lot of risks inherent in farming, which means that a lot of traditional conventional loan options and financial products are not available to farmers. One of the biggest things that has come out of that whole scenario is that the USDA and the Farm Service Agency has guaranteed loans for things like operational lines of credit, farm purchase, equipment purchase. We are well aware of the problems with those systems, but those are things that are out there that are supposed to be helping farmers. And those processes do not take into account non-production farm income when they're determining how much you're allowed to apply for. So they want to see how much you are allowed to, how much you are going to be able to produce on that land. And the feedback that we've gotten from our farmers when they've tried to apply for these loans is that, and the feedback that we've gotten recently through our focus groups is that FSA loans do not take into account agritourism income. They very minimally or limitedly allow you to put any of that into your business plan because that's not what they are in the business of funding. And so when that's the only product available to you to purchase land, this type of use does drive a wedge between what farmers can afford based on the financial products available to them to purchase land and what the market is going to say this property is worth. So how do we fill that gap? That's something that our Oregon FarmLink team, something that our Capital Access for Local Farmers project is trying to figure out, but it is a continual problem for beginning and expanding small farmers in this state as well as the nation. So we don't want to encourage additional barriers to people trying to get into farming. Farming is an incredibly capital heavy um, industry. It's very difficult to break in, and we don't want to make it so that only people with independent wealth can be farmers. That's not good for our food system. It's not good for food sovereignty or security, and it's a very dangerous choice for Oregon for the future. So what's in the farm store bill? All of these things are setting the scene for why we unfortunately had to be opposed to this bill. So it introduces a secondary permit that you can, well, not secondary, an additional, a parallel permit that you can apply for. So the bill as passed does leave the current farm stand language unchanged. So if you have a farm stand, you can still operate that if you're permitted with the county, or if you were planning to apply under the current law, that is still an option. It has, it's unchanged completely. No additional event types. You still are subject to the 75-25 test, all of those things. But the farm store permit is a new permit type that is essentially kind of giving a trade-off of it's only available to folks who have a certain amount of acreage and production. But the trade-off is those people can have unlimited event and incidental item income. So you do have to have something for sale, but that was grown on your farm in the local agricultural area, but you can derive 99% of your income through this 10,000 square foot building that you are allowed to build. I mean, it doesn't have to be 10,000 square feet. That's the upper limit. But you can derive 99% of your income from ticket-based events. That is entirely new for a farm stand, and in FoFF's opinion, counter to the ethos of the farm stand. Farm stands are supposed to be for selling farm product, but farm stores under this bill are for having people out to the farm as an end all be all, not to promote the farm production, not to help people understand, but you are allowed to have any type of event you want because the event categories are very open ended. And you are allowed to have any type of event you want on an unlimited basis, charge an unlimited amount of money, and just be able to do that on EFU's own land, whether or not it has any connection to your farm business. The acreage requirements have been a problem. We've highlighted that for a long time with this bill. They determined some, in my mind, pretty arbitrary acreage caps for eligibility. So the eligibility goes if you have 80 or above acres, so any amount of acres. The average farm size in Oregon is like 430 acres. I know that seems big for the folks that we work with, but that is encompassing, there's a lot of outliers in the system that may be driving that up, but that's the average farm size in Oregon is 430 acres. So think about that for that largest category. You are only required to have 45 acres in production. So that is a little bit over 50% if you only own 80 acres. If you own 430 acres, what is that? Just over 10%? So that is a big difference in the amount of area that you are required to put into farming versus when you go down the list of the other acreage categories. For example, then it goes from 40 acres to just under 80 acres, so 79.99. Then you have to have 25 acres in production. So that starts off at about 60% or 55-ish percent, and then goes all the way down to like about 30% if you own at the acreage at the top of that threshold. Then for the next tier down, which is like 20 to 40 acres, you have to have 15 acres in production. And so that can be quite a bit of your acreage, or About 35%. So these acreage thresholds are incredibly difficult for people to meet, especially on the lower end, because we got a call, especially in that 20 to 40 range. We got a call from someone who owns 21 acres, so she would have to be in that um, so she would have to be in that 20 to 40 acre range. There's no way for her to have 15 acres in production because she only has water rights for 4 acres on her property. A lot of it is heavily wooded. A lot of it is steep. Some of it is riparian area. It's not safe to farm there. It's not good for the water quality. None of those things are taken into account in this eligibility criteria. So, and then on the lowest end, if you own 20 or below acres, you either have to have 10 acres in production. So 10 acres in production, this is 20 or below acres as a category. So you can own 5 acres and they're telling you you have to have 10 acres in production. Or you can prove that you have 10,000 acre or $10,000 of farm income over the preceding 2 years. There is no other category that has any revenue requirement. So although we appreciate the parallel pathway there, that means that someone with 81 acres could have a 45-acre hayfield that they derive no profit from, that they just have cut once a year. They might even have to pay someone to cut it. And that means that they could have unlimited event income with no proof of any farm income at all, as long as someone from the county determines that that is farm use. So those requirements open, if you meet those requirements, those acreage requirements, you now can apply for a farm store permit. So that excludes a lot of my farmers right off the bat of our community. Meeting those requirements is not as easy as the Association of Oregon Counties and the Property Owners Association would like us to think, especially when you're trying to do meaningful production. I would also point out that this privileges livestock producers over crop producers in a big way because having 10 acres of diversified vegetables is a large diversified veggie farm here in Oregon. If you are going for a direct to consumer market, doing you are doing diversified succession planting. 10 acres is a lot. The biggest CSA farm that I know of in the state only has 15 acres in production, and they're feeding 500 families a week. That's huge. But 10 acres of livestock production can be pretty minimal and easy to manage, depending on how you have your stuff set up. So that is just another way that this was not designed with small farms in mind. So if you meet those standards, you can apply for this permit, which removes all revenue caps on your ability to. Yeah, that's a good question, Damien. Damien in the chat asked, wondering if having bees would circumvent the acre production usage. That's a really good question because I will. Oh, but Brittany just told me that we would get to that after the questions. But bees are considered livestock in some laws, so that's a good question to see if that would be able to circumvent that. But hey, we will see during the rulemaking process on this bill. So if you meet those requirements, you then get to open up this entire new world where you have no revenue caps on fee-based events. You can now have all of those types of events that we were hoping everyone would get to enjoy. So you can have those educational events, you can have farm-to-table dinners, you can have those seasonal and holiday events, but only if you meet these acreage requirements. I want to be very clear that we wanted to have those educational programming and farm to table meals and seasonal or holiday events. We wanted that to be open to everyone within the revenue caps, but now that's only if you are able to meet these acreage requirements. It also allows you to build a new structure of 10,000 square feet and use existing structures of up to 10,000 square feet. So that's 20,000 square feet of either event or retail space. There is a limitation on you can only have 25% of the square footage be for incidental item sales, so non-farm product. Oh, and I should clarify that the farm product definition remains the same. So your farm's product or farm product from the local agricultural area, which includes the entire state of Oregon and adjacent counties if you're in a border county. So if you live in Hood River, you can sell stuff from White Salmon across the river. But if you live in Junction City, where I live, you can't sell things from White Salmon. So that is a thing that we do support keeping that definition the same. It helps our folks on the east side immensely. But this would just allow you to have a much, much, much larger than is necessary and than is sustainable event space on your farm with unlimited events without uh, any possibility for your neighbors to have their voices heard if that's impacting their ability to run their equipment or access their roads or all of those kinds of things. I will say one thing that is good about this is that there is clarification on processed farm products. So if you're doing the value added producer process exemption things, that is kind of a blurry line in current law. In the farm store bill, they clarify that those things are deemed farm product. But again, that improvement only applies if you qualify for this permit. So it's creating a two-tiered system. And essentially the onus of this bill was to make things easier on counties, to make it less subjective, to make it more straightforward. I don't think that adding this additional permitting structure is making things any simpler. I think that once they realized, the proponents of this bill realized that they could not just eliminate farm stands as they currently stand with this acreage and revenue scheme, it became clear that the goal of this bill was to have unlimited event income on EFU's own land. And that's what we're seeing here. That is the only goal of this proposal. All the other things were kind of fluff to get there. So this passed out of the House Ag Committee on the 16th. What we've been discussing is the -3 amendment. This passed in general on the 6th. So it went to after the House Ag Committee. This bill was assigned to Ways and Means. There is no fiscal impact for this bill. That was incredibly irregular, in my opinion, that this did not go to a Senate Policy Committee for further debate. It went to Ways and Means, which is usually where bills that have a budget impact that need money to be implemented. There was a very vague fiscal attached to it when it left House Ag, saying there could be a fiscal impact. It was determined while it was in Ways and Means that there is no fiscal impact, and it was passed with a statement on it that says there is no fiscal impact. So this bill was erroneously put to Ways and Means to avoid further discussion in the Senate Natural Resources Committee. We did put forward an alternate solution while it was still in House Ag. We kept all of the new event types. We clarified the value-added products. We also implemented a clear permit exemption for when you don't need a permit at all. Because in the current law, that was one of the biggest things, is that we don't know where the line is between counties needing a permit for a farm stand and you just selling ag product. We also raised the revenue cap, and it applied to all farmers equally. We were really proud of this solution that we were able to put together. We were also really proud that we were able to get all of the land use groups who opposed 4153 to say that they would support this. This alternative was not discussed in House Ag. They said, we received it, we will not be discussing it. That is a miscarriage of process in my mind. This is not the regular way that things go when you come to the table and do a good faith effort to find a middle ground. Just to have a predetermined solution shoved through a committee that is not going to discuss the policy of the bill. So, what does it mean that it passed? Okay, so it's headed to the governor for signature. If it is not vetoed, it will take effect on January 1st, 2027. I do not think that the governor will veto the bill. She, of course, could veto the bill. There were about 1,600 pieces of, just under 1,600 pieces of testimony submitted on this bill. About 70% of it, 1,100 people were opposed to it. So I think that the governor, if she signs this and pushes it through, she has been very vocally supportive of this bill throughout the process. And if she is willing to maintain that and sign this into law, she's ignoring those 1,100 Oregonians who are very concerned about what this means for the land use system. So we will see. She has 30 days to sign it. If it is not vetoed, it does take effect on January 1st. And there will be a rulemaking process for this bill, and FoFF will continue. Just because this is not what we think the best solution for Oregon is, doesn't mean we're going to shy away from this topic. We will fight our way onto that committee. If necessary, we will start with requesting nicely that we are a member of that committee to provide our producers input on what we think is appropriate within the bounds of the law as passed. And we will continue to look for solutions. We will continue to come to the table and we will represent our community's kind of more nuanced approach to this topic to make sure that both folks are able to diversify their income and stay afloat now, but also that we're not cutting off pathways for new people to enter the farm system. So stay tuned. Okay. So we are now going to talk about Senate Bill 1586. Sorry, I took up the most time with the farm store bill. I assume that's what most people are following from us this session, so I wanted to give enough detail. So Senate Bill 1586 was a UGB and urban reserve expansion for Hillsboro. So this would have annexed about 1,700 acres of both class 1 and class 2 soils, so very high quality agricultural soils, prime farmland in the western half of Washington County. And this parcel has been targeted for annexation for various reasons, for housing, for heavy industrial, now for advanced manufacturing. This is the sixth time that Senator Solomon has tried to bring the same parcel into the UGB. This was assigned to the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee because the most of the bill is about tax credits for advanced manufacturing, which can be AI generating data centers. It could also be biotech. It could also be some other high-tech industries and manufacturing. We don't have an opinion on those industries. That's not our area of expertise. We do have an opinion that we should not be supplanting farming and other natural resource industries that are dependent on the soil, air, and water resources by giving that land over to temporary infrastructure builds. Because when we're talking about these companies, a lot of them are multinational, out of state, sometimes out of the country companies who are going where the tax breaks are. And we also know that these companies have a history of leaving when a tax break ends. And so if we're going to be temporarily putting this into this industrial usage, we're not going to be able to reclaim that for agriculture afterwards. Once it's paved over, once those soils are compacted, once those industrial facilities are built, we're never getting that farmland back. Why would we give over an incredibly valuable resource for the second largest industry in Oregon, which is agriculture, for an industry that could be built anywhere? Our position is that we are not against the expansion of those industries. They are to the side of what we work on. We do think that they should be redeveloping lands within UGBs that are currently available to house those industries and not sacrificing prime farmland for an industry that, A, they don't have any commitments for upfront. This is all speculation. They hope to attract them in the future. And B, they don't need those natural resources in order for those industries to be successful. It's picking winners and losers in a pretty permanent way. So this was assigned to Senate Finance and Revenue because of the tax breaks associated with it. That meant that the land use conversation was kind of the back burner for that committee because that's not what they usually deal with. That's not their area of expertise. And that, I think, was by design. There was staunch local opposition. Many people, many well-organized community groups in Washington County have been speaking up on this and the continual threat to this high-value farmland that the community does not support. So that's another reason that we stand against this kind of development, is that the farmers in that area who we represent have told us very, very explicitly that this harms them and that they do not want this to happen. So we joined with them to oppose this bill. And there were 3 different hearings, and testimony was held over and held over and held over. We actually didn't get the opportunity to speak at these hearings. We ended up having to submit in writing because there were so many people who wanted to speak on this bill. And the bill was defeated. Defeated is a strong word. This bill did not move forward, I guess is a better characterization of what happened. It was scheduled for a work session at one point on the 23rd, I believe, but the committee decided to pull the work session. The work session is the committee vote that would have advanced the bill. So this bill got 3 hearings, no work session, which means that it did not advance in this legislative session. It doesn't mean that this won't come back. So we will continue to monitor this and continue to work with our partners on the ground in this area to make sure that we're not losing crucial agricultural soils and that we're also not isolating our farming communities from the services that they need to survive as we move forward into a future where, although ag is the second largest industry in Oregon and it feeds us and stewards our lands and in many ways has myriad benefits beyond the bottom line, it is not valued the way that some other industries in the state are valued. So we're going to have to continue to talk about what prosperity looks like here in Oregon. Okay, so budget reduction packages. Okay, so at the beginning of the session, and you probably heard this from us before, at the beginning of the session, around before the session actually in November, the agencies had to submit um, budget cuts of 5% of general funds. The governor asked them to find 5% cuts across the board, every agency. This led to the agencies developing lists of programs and projects that many of which we advocated for the implementation and to stand them up, that they were handing letters or lists of programs that the legislature could now consider superfluous. And we don't want those programs to be considered temporary or expendable. And so we launched a sign-on letter to help folks understand the importance of those programs. We also brought together 113 folks to different farm businesses from across the state to sign on to our letter, and we really appreciate everyone who spoke up because the programs that we highlighted are those here, and we will are we're happy to announce that none of these programs were eliminated through the budget process. So there were some vacancy savings in the Department of Ag. We did not see any cuts to the Oregon Farm to School Infrastructure and Equipment Grant or the pesticide stewardship and monitoring programs. We didn't see those cuts bear out in the final budget reconciliation. We also did not see any cuts to the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program or notably the State Extension Service. So that was a big one for us because in order for OSU, HEC is the higher education committee or higher education agency. And so Oregon State University is under HEC, and OSU proposed budget cuts that would have kind of used extension cuts to not cut in other areas. So essentially they were looking at statewide, including extension service, receiving an almost 8% cut in order to accommodate other parts of their budget. But we did not see any cuts to the OSU statewide and extension service in the final budget, which is incredible because we were very concerned that that would result in loss of county extension offices, reductions in staff, all of those kinds of things that will take years to recoup. But that didn't happen. So thank you so much for everyone's advocacy on this. There were some there were some vague mentions of reductions in service for OWRD. So I don't know if that means the water measurement cost share program is completely intact. We will stay tuned on that to make sure that if that program, which currently has some federal match, but that will probably go away in the next cycle, if that ends up happening, we'll let you know. And then also, we are a member of the Food for All Oregonians campaign. We have been a member of this campaign for the last 3 sessions, and we endorse the anti-hunger package. We've talked about this on and off throughout the session, but we want to update you on how the 4 things that they were asking for bared out this session. So 2 of them, pretty big wins. There were 2 budget requests that were funded through the budget. $2 million dedicated to refugee and asylee support for groups who lost access to SNAP through the federal legislation last year. So there were groups who were previously eligible for SNAP because of their refugee and asylum seeker status, and they lost access to these resources because of HR1, the federal legislation that was passed last year. And so there is $2 million that's going out through established refugee resettlement and those community resources, established organizations who know those communities very well. That money is going to flow out for temporary assistance for those folks. So that's a huge win. And there was also a total of $111 million dedicated to Oregon's SNAP program. This is a very big deal, especially when we think about our role as food producers in the food system and making sure people have enough food to thrive. Because a lot of the things in HR1 about reducing error rates and security and making sure there's no fraud in the system, down the road, that if we didn't invest this money now, we could have lost benefits for Oregonians or had to foot the bill for a larger amount of the SNAP spending in Oregon down the road if we were not able to make these investments up front. So this is very, very good news and will benefit everyone who receives SNAP benefits in the state. Things that are included in this program are like upgrading card security, switching Oregon Trail cards to chip cards to prevent skimming theft of benefits. Because I think you all are all aware of, when most banks changed to chip cards, it was a security thing to make sure that skimming devices were not on card swipers to take your information and be able to use your card without you present. And so that same thing was happening with SNAP benefits, but people had no means of recourse there if their SNAP benefits were stolen. So the state has dedicated these funds to one, prevent benefit theft by upgrading to chip cards. There's also increased measures at the state level to prevent errors and avoid penalties from the federal government. That includes ODHS employees and lots of other beefing up of the system. I can send out a full list when we are off this call. So those are great wins that will help people be fed here in Oregon. And we are very excited that the state has invested in those ways. And that is, especially in this climate of budget uncertainty, getting $113 million dedicated to these programs is a big deal. So we want to pause and just have a moment of celebration for that. There were two other parts of the package that did not bear out this session, but I have a feeling we will come back for them. So there was a bill. Three of these are just budgetary asks, but there was one bill in the mix, Senate Bill 1581. That is the School Meals for All bill. It did not pass this session. Although 95% of Oregon schools provide some universal school meal option, many of those are not universal breakfast and lunch. A lot of those programs are underfunded. And this bill was proposed to bring that up to 100% free breakfast and lunch for students across Oregon. And despite bipartisan support, this bill did not pass this session. That is very disappointing, but we will be back again and we will continue our endorsement of the Food for All Oregonians campaign and bring the producer voice into the conversation. There was also a request for, I think, $5 million from the state for Oregon's Emergency Food Network. And that is the food bank networks across the state who are providing emergency food assistance to our communities. They have seen an incredible uptick in demand in the last 18 months, and it continues to rise. And this emergency food assistance was not funded during the session. There was some conversation about legislators thinking that this had already been done because of an emergency infusion that the governor was able to secure last year when SNAP benefits were delayed by the federal government. The need is ongoing. And unfortunately, we need to keep thinking about this as an ongoing conversation and making sure that people have long-term support. So that question was not settled last year with the emergency infusion, and This one-time request was another stopgap measure because we are not able to keep up with the demand in the emergency food network. So that request was not honored this session, but it does not mean that we will not try again. And that is the update on the anti-hunger package and where that came together. So, next steps. I would love everyone to take our survey. Our farmer survey, our farmer and community member survey is open now. It is open through the end of March, and this is a great way. We've already concluded our focus groups. Thank you to everyone who participated. But this is the way to get your issues on our radar. We are a grassroots organization, and we do not work on things that our base does not bring up to us. So the survey and the focus groups and working with our programs are the best ways to get your voice in the mix, and the survey is the most direct way to do that right now. So if you would like something in your community to be addressed, a particular barrier that you're facing to be addressed in FoFF's policy platform, or if you want us to start a campaign on it, or if you want us to work on something that's happening to you that's keeping your farm from thriving or keeping you from taking an opportunity that you see out there in the world, please, please, please fill out our survey. We have that open, like I said, through the end of the month. There will be some incentives, so you could be entered to win some prizes if you fill out the survey. And this is the #1 way that we gather information from our base. Every 2 years, we do this survey process and the focus groups to refresh our policy report, which will be coming out this summer. So please do not delay. Take the survey today. All right. And that is the end of our update. Thank you so much.